Asymmetric phenomena such as parasitism and predation are ruled out by the terms of reference, but cooperative strategies such as swarming, and negative interactions such as competing for limited food or light are allowed, so long as all individuals behave the same way. The theory makes predictions that have implications for the management of biodiversity, especially the management of rare species. It predicts the existence of a fundamental biodiversity constant, conventionally written theta, that appears to govern species richness on a wide variety of spatial and temporal scales. Hubble built on earlier neutral concepts, including MacArthur and Wilson's theory of island biogeography, 20, and Gould's concepts of symmetry and null models. 34. Spatial ecology. Biogeography. Biogeography is the study of the distribution of species in space and time. It aims to reveal where organisms live, at what abundance, and why they are or are not found in a certain geographical area. Biogeography is most keenly observed on islands, which has led to the development of the subdiscipline of island biogeography. These habitats are often more manageable areas of study because they are more condensed than larger ecosystems on the mainland. In 1967, Robert MacArthur and E.O. Wilson published the theory of island biogeography. This showed that the species richness in an area could be predicted in terms of factors such as habitat area, immigration rate and extinction rate. 36. The theory is considered one of the fundamentals of ecological theory. 37. The application of island biogeography theory to habitat fragments spurred the development of the fields of conservation biology and landscape ecology. 38. RK selection theory. A population ecology concept is RK selection theory, one of the first predictive models in ecology used to explain life history evolution. The premise behind the RK selection model is that natural selection pressures change according to population density. For example, when an island is first colonized, density of individuals is low. The initial increase in population size is not limited by competition, leaving an abundance of available resources for rapid population growth. These early phases of population growth experience density-independent forces of natural selection, which is called R selection. As the population becomes more crowded, it approaches the island's carrying capacity, thus forcing individuals to compete more heavily for fewer available resources. Under crowded conditions, the population experiences density-dependent forces of natural selection, called K selection. 39-40. The diversity and containment of coral reef systems make them good sites for testing niche and neutral theories. 41. Niche theory. Metapopulations. Spatial analysis of ecological systems often reveals that assumptions that are valid for spatially homogeneous populations, and indeed, intuitive, may no longer be valid when migratory subpopulations moving from one patch to another are considered. 42. In a simple one-species formulation, a subpopulation may occupy a patch, move from one patch to another empty patch, or die out leaving an empty patch behind. In such a case, the proportion of occupied patches may be represented as, where m is the rate of colonization, and e is the rate of extinction. 43. In this model, if e less than m, the steady-state value of p is 1 e per meter, while in the other case, all the patches will eventually be left empty. This model may be made more complex by addition of another species in several different ways, including but not limited to game-theoretic approaches, predator-prey interactions, etc. We will consider here an extension of the previous one-species system for simplicity. Let us denote the proportion of patches occupied by the first population as P1, and that by the second as P2. Then, in this case, if E is too high, P1 and P2 will be zero at steady state. However, when the rate of extinction is moderate, P1 and P2 can stably coexist. The steady state value of P2 is given by P1 may be inferred by symmetry. If E is zero, the dynamics of the system favor the species that is better at colonizing, i.e. has the higher m value. This leads to a very important result in theoretical ecology known as the intermediate disturbance hypothesis, where the biodiversity, the number of species that coexist in the population, is maximized when the disturbance, of which E is a proxy here, is not too high or too low, but at intermediate levels. 44. The form of the differential equations used in this simplistic modeling approach can be modified. For example, 1. Colonization may be dependent on p linearly m 1p, as opposed to the nonlinear m p 1p regime described above. This mode of replication of a species is called the reign of propagules, where there is an abundance of new individuals entering the population at every generation. In such a scenario, the steady state where the population is zero is usually unstable. 45. 2. Extinction may depend nonlinearly on p 1p, as opposed to the linear e p regime described above. This is referred to as the rescue effect, and it is again harder to drive a population extinct under this regime. 45. The model can also be extended to combinations of the four possible linear or nonlinear dependencies of colonization and extinction on p are described in more detail in 46. Ecosystem ecology. Introducing new elements, whether biotic or abiotic, into ecosystems can be disruptive. In some cases, it leads to ecological collapse, trophic cascades and the death of many species within the ecosystem. The abstract notion of ecological health attempts to measure the robustness and recovery capacity for an ecosystem, i.e. how far the ecosystem is away from its steady state. Often, however, ecosystems rebound from a disruptive agent. The difference between collapse or rebound depends on the toxicity of the introduced element and the resiliency of the original ecosystem. If ecosystems are governed primarily by stochastic processes, through which its subsequent state would be determined by both predictable and random actions, they may be more resilient to sudden change than each species individually. In the absence of a balance of nature, the species composition of ecosystems would undergo shifts that would depend on the nature of the change, but entire ecological collapse would probably be infrequent events. In 1997, Robert Ulanowitz used information theory tools to describe the structure of ecosystems, emphasizing mutual information correlations in studied systems. Drawing on this methodology and prior observations of complex ecosystems, Ulanowitz depicts approaches to determining the stress levels on ecosystems and predicting system reactions to define types of alteration in their settings, such as increased or reduced energy flow and eutrophication. 47. EcoPath is a free ecosystem modeling software suite, initially developed by NOAA, and widely used in fisheries management as a tool for modeling and visualizing the complex relationships that exist in real-world marine ecosystems. Food webs. Food webs provide a framework within which a complex network of predator-prey interactions can be organized. A food web model is a network of food chains. Each food chain starts with a primary producer or autotroph, an organism, such as a plant, which is able to manufacture its own food. Next in the chain is an organism that feeds on the primary producer, and the chain continues in this way as a string of successive predators. The organisms in each chain are grouped into trophic levels, based on how many links they are removed from the primary producers. The length of the chain, or trophic level, is a measure of the number of species encountered as energy or nutrients move from plants to top predators. 48 Food energy flows from one organism to the next and so on, with some energy being lost at each level. At a given trophic level there may be one species or a group of species with the same predators and prey. 49. In 1927, Charles Elton published an influential synthesis on the use of food webs, which resulted in them becoming a central concept in ecology. 50. In 1966, interest in food webs increased after Robert Payne's experimental and descriptive study of intertidal shores, suggesting that food web complexity was key to maintaining species diversity and ecological stability. 51. Many theoretical ecologists, including Sir Robert May and Stuart Pym, were prompted by this discovery and others to examine the mathematical properties of food webs. According to their analyses, complex food webs should be less stable than simple food webs. 175 to 77. 264 The apparent paradox between the complexity of food webs observed in nature and the mathematical fragility of food web models is currently an area of intensive study and debate. The paradox may be due partially to conceptual differences between persistence of a food web and equilibrial stability of a food web. 1. 2. Systems ecology. Systems ecology can be seen as an application of general systems theory to ecology. It takes a holistic and interdisciplinary approach to the study of ecological systems, and particularly ecosystems. Systems ecology is especially concerned with the way the functioning of ecosystems can be influenced by human interventions. Like other fields in theoretical ecology, it uses and extends concepts from thermodynamics and develops other macroscopic descriptions of complex systems. It also takes account of the energy flows through the different trophic levels in the ecological networks. Systems ecology also considers the external influence of ecological economics, which usually is not otherwise considered in ecosystem ecology. 52. For the most part, systems ecology is a subfield of ecosystem ecology. Ecophysiology. This is the study of how the environment, both physical and biological, interacts with the physiology of an organism. It includes the effects of climate and nutrients on physiological processes in both plants and animals, and has a particular focus on how physiological processes scale with organism. Size. 53. 54. Behavioral ecology. Swarm behavior. Flocks of birds can abruptly change their direction in unison, and then, just as suddenly, make a unanimous group decision to land. 55. Swarm behavior is a collective behavior exhibited by animals of similar size which aggregate together, perhaps milling about the same spot or perhaps migrating in some direction. Swarm behavior is commonly exhibited by insects, but it also occurs in the flocking of birds, the schooling of fish and the herd behavior of quadrupeds. It is a complex emergent behavior that occurs when individual agents follow simple behavioral rules. Recently, a number of mathematical models have been discovered which explain many aspects of the emergent behavior. Swarm algorithms follow a Lagrangian approach or an Eulerian approach. 56. The Eulerian approach views the swarm as a field, working with the density of the swarm and deriving mean field properties. It is a hydrodynamic approach, and can be useful for modeling the overall dynamics of large swarms. 57, 58, 59. However, most models work with the Lagrangian approach, which is an agent-based model following the individual agents, points or particles that make up the swarm. Individual particle models can follow information on heading and spacing that is lost in the Eulerian approach. 56, 60. Examples include ant colony optimization, self-propelled particles and particle swarm optimization. On cellular levels, individual organisms also demonstrated swarm behavior. Decentralized systems are where individuals act based on their own decisions without overarching guidance. Studies have shown that individual trichoplics adherens behave like self-propelled particles, SPPs, and collectively display phase transition from ordered movement to disordered movements. 61. Previously, it was thought that the surface-to-volume ratio was what limited the animal size in the evolutionary game. Considering the collective behavior of the individuals, it was suggested that order is another limiting factor. Central nervous systems were indicated to be vital for large multicellular animals in the evolutionary pathway. Synchronization. Photinus carolinus firefly will synchronize their shining frequencies in a collective setting. Individually, there are no apparent patterns for the flashing. In a group setting, periodicity emerges in the shining pattern. 62. The coexistence of the synchronization and asynchronization in the flashings in the system composed of multiple fireflies could be characterized by the chimera states. Synchronization could spontaneously occur. 63. The agent-based model has been useful in describing this unique phenomenon. The flashings of individual fireflies could be viewed as oscillators, and the global coupling models were similar to the ones used in condensed matter physics. Evolutionary ecology. The British biologist Alfred Russel Wallace is best known for independently proposing a theory of evolution due to natural selection that prompted Charles Darwin to publish his own theory. In his famous 1858 paper, Wallace proposed natural selection as a kind of feedback mechanism which keeps species and varieties adapted to their environment. 64. The action of this principle is exactly like that of the centrifugal governor of the steam engine, which checks and corrects any irregularities almost before they become evident, and in like manner no unbalanced deficiency in the animal kingdom can ever reach any conspicuous magnitude, because it would make itself felt at the very first step, by rendering existence difficult and extinction almost sure soon to follow. 65. The cybernetician and anthropologist Gregory Bateson observed in the 1970s that, though writing it only as an example, Wallace had, probably said the most powerful thing that had been said in the 19th century. 66. Subsequently, the connection between natural selection and systems theory has become an area of active research. 64. Other theories. In contrast to previous ecological theories which considered floods to be catastrophic events, the river flood pulse concept argues that the annual flood pulse is the most important aspect and the most biologically productive feature of a river's ecosystem. 67. 68. History. Theoretical ecology draws on pioneering work done by G. Evelyn Hutchinson and his students. Brothers H. T. Odum and E. P. Odum are generally recognized as the founders of modern theoretical ecology. Robert MacArthur brought theory to community ecology. Daniel Simberloff was the student of E. O. Wilson, with whom MacArthur collaborated on the theory of island biogeography, a seminal work in the development of theoretical ecology. 69. Simberloff added statistical rigor to experimental ecology and was a key figure in the SLOS debate, about whether it is preferable to protect a single large or several small reserves. 70. This resulted in the supporters of Jared Diamond's community assembly rules defending their ideas through neutral model analysis. 70. Simberloff also played a key role in the still ongoing debate on the utility of corridors for connecting isolated reserves. Stephen P. Hubble and Michael Rosenzweig combined theoretical and practical elements into works that extended MacArthur and Wilson's island biogeography theory, Hubble with his unified neutral theory of biodiversity and biogeography, and Rosenzweig with his species diversity in space and time. Theoretical and mathematical ecologists. A tentative distinction can be made between mathematical ecologists, ecologists who apply mathematics to ecological problems, and mathematicians who develop the mathematics itself that arises out of ecological problems. Some notable theoretical ecologists can be found in these categories. Category: mathematical ecologists. Category: theoretical biologists. Colonization biology. Colonization or colonization is the spread and development of an organism in a new area or habitat. Colonization comprises the physical arrival of a species in a new area, but also its successful establishment within the local community. In ecology, it is represented by the symbol lambda, lowercase lambda, to denote the long-term intrinsic growth rate of a population. Diagram showing bacteria growing and forming into a biofilm on a surface. Surrounding theories and applicable process have been introduced below. These include dispersal, colonization, competition, trade-off, and prominent examples that have been previously studied. One classic scientific model in biogeography posits that a species must continue to colonize new areas through its life cycle, called a taxon cycle, in order to persist. Accordingly, colonization and extinction are key components of island biogeography, a theory that has many applications in ecology, such as metapopulations. Another factor included in this scientific model is the competition-colonization trade-off. This idea goes into the driving factors of colonization through many species that all share a need to expand. Scale. Colonization occurs on several scales. In the most basic form, as biofilm in the formation of communities of microorganisms on surfaces. 1. This microbiological colonization also takes place within each animal or plant and is called microbiome. In small scales such as colonizing new sites, perhaps as a result of environmental change. And on larger scales where a species expands its range to encompass new areas. This can be through a series of small encroachments, such as in woody plant encroachment, or by long-distance dispersal. The term range expansion is also used. 2. Dispersal. Dispersion in biology is the dissemination, or scattering, of organisms over periods within a given area or over the earth. The dispersion of species into new locations can be inspired by many causes. Oftentimes species naturally disperse due to physiological adaptations which allows for a higher survival rate of progeny in new ecosystems. Other times these driving factors are environmentally related, for example global warming, disease, competition, predation. Dispersion of different species can come in many forms. Some prime examples of this is flight of species across long distances, wind dispersal of plant and fungi progeny, long distance of travel in packs, etc. Competition-colonization trade-off. The competition-colonization trade-off refers to a driving factor that has a large influence over diversity and how it is maintained in a community. This is considered a driving factor because all species have to make a decision to entertain competition with others in the community or disperse from the community in hopes of a more optimal environment. This can span from available nutrient sources, light exposure, oxygen availability, reproduction competition, etc. These trade-offs are critical in the explanation of colonization and why it happens. 1. Bare rock. 2. New species. Introduced. 3. Death and accumulation of topsoil. 4. New species. Introduction displacing pioneer species. 5. More nutrients and soil accumulation creates opportunities for larger species colonization. Use. The term is generally only used to refer to the spread of a species into new areas by natural means, as opposed to unnatural introduction or translocation by humans, which may lead to invasive species. Colonization events. The range of the little egret, Egretta garzetta, has expanded since the 20th century, with the species having colonized most of the New World. Large-scale notable prehistoric colonization events include arthropods. The colonization of the Earth's land by the first animals, the arthropods. The first fossils of land animals come from millipedes. These were seen about 450 million years ago. 3. Humans. The early human migration and colonization of areas outside Africa according to the recent African origin paradigm, resulting in the extinction of Pleistocene megafauna, although the role of humans in this event is controversial. Birds. The colonization of the New World by the cattle egret and the little egret. The colonization of Britain by the little egret. Image of the green iguana that colonized Anguilla. The colonization of Western North America by the barred owl. 4. 5. The colonization of the east coast of North America by the brewer's blackbird. The colonization westward spread across Europe of the collared dove. The spread across the eastern USA of the house finch. The colonization of Western North America by the barred owl. 4. 5. The colonization of the east coast of North America by the brewer's blackbird. The colonization westward spread across Europe of the collared dove. The spread across the eastern USA of the house finch. The expansion into the southern and western areas of South Africa by the Hadeda ibis reptiles. The colonization of Anguilla by green iguanas following a rafting event in 1995. The colonization of Burmese pythons into the Florida Everglades. The release of snakes came from the desire to breed them and sell them as exotic pets. As they grew, people became unable to care for the animals and began to release them into the Everglades. Dragonflies. The colonization of Britain by the small red-eyed damselfly moths. The colonization of Britain by Blair's shoulder knot. Colonization by ecological stability. In ecology, an ecosystem is said to possess ecological stability, or equilibrium, if it is capable of returning to its equilibrium state after a perturbation, a capacity known as resilience, or does not experience unexpected large changes in its characteristics across time. 1. Although the terms community stability and ecological stability are sometimes used interchangeably, 2. Community stability refers only to the characteristics of communities. It is possible for an ecosystem or a community to be stable in some of their properties and unstable in others. For example, a vegetation community in response to a drought might conserve biomass but lose biodiversity. 3. An example of ecological stability. Stable ecological systems abound in nature, and the scientific literature has documented them to a great extent. Scientific studies mainly describe grassland plant communities and microbial communities. 4. Nevertheless, it is important to mention that not every community or ecosystem in nature is stable, for example, wolves and moose on Isle Royale. Also, noise plays an important role on biological systems and, in some scenarios, it can fully determine their temporal dynamics. The concept of ecological stability emerged in the first half of the 20th century. 3. An example of ecological stability. Some authors, however, ecological stability. In ecology, an ecosystem is said to possess ecological stability, or equilibrium, if it is capable of returning to its equilibrium state after a perturbation, a capacity known as resilience, or does not experience unexpected large changes in its characteristics across time. 1. Although the terms community stability and ecological stability are sometimes used interchangeably, 2. Community stability refers only to the characteristics of communities. It is possible for an ecosystem or a community to be stable in some of their properties and unstable in others. For example, a vegetation community in response to a drought might conserve biomass but lose biodiversity. 3. An example of ecological stability. Stable ecological systems abound in nature, and the scientific literature has documented them to a great extent. Scientific studies mainly describe grassland plant communities and microbial communities. 4. Nevertheless, it is important to mention that not every community or ecosystem in nature is stable, for example, wolves and moose on Isle Royale. Also, noise plays an important role on biological systems and, in some scenarios, it can fully determine their temporal dynamics. The concept of ecological stability emerged in the first half of the 20th century. With the advancement of theoretical ecology in the 1970s, the usage of the term has expanded to a wide variety of scenarios. This overuse of the term has led to controversy over its definition and implementation. 3. In 1997, Grimm and Wissel made an inventory of 167 definitions used in the literature and found 70 different stability concepts. 5. One of the strategies that these two authors proposed to clarify the subject is to replace ecological stability with more specific terms, such as constancy, resilience and persistence. In order to fully describe and put meaning to a specific kind of stability, it must be looked at more carefully. Otherwise the statements made about stability will have little to no reliability because they would not have information to back up the claim. 6. Following this strategy, an ecosystem which oscillates cyclically around a fixed point, such as the one delineated by the predator-prey equations, would be described as persistent and resilient, but not as constant. Some authors, however, see good reason for the abundance of definitions, because they reflect the extensive variety of real and mathematical systems. 3. Stability analysis. When the species abundances of an ecological system are treated with a set of differential equations, it is possible to test for stability by linearizing the system at the equilibrium point. 7. Robert May used this stability analysis in the 1970s, which uses the Jacobian matrix or community matrix to investigate the relation between the diversity and stability of an ecosystem. 8. May stability analysis and random matrix theory. To analyze the stability of large ecosystems, May drew on ideas from statistical mechanics, including Eugene Wigner's work successfully predicting the properties of uranium by assuming that its Hamiltonian could be approximated as a random matrix, leading to properties that were independent of the system's exact interactions. 8, 9, 10. May considered an ecosystem with species with abundances whose dynamics are governed by the Couples system of ordinary differential equations. Assuming the system had a fixed point, May linearized dynamics as: the fixed point will be linearly stable if all the eigenvalues of the Jacobian are positive. The matrix is also known as the community matrix. May supposed that the Jacobian was a random matrix whose off-diagonal entries are all drawn as random variates from a probability distribution and whose diagonal elements are all -1, so that each species inhibits its own growth and stability is guaranteed in the absence of interspecies interactions. According to Virchow's circular law, when the eigenvalues of are distributed in the complex plane uniformly in a circle whose radius is and whose center is, where is the standard deviation of the distribution for the off-diagonal elements of the Jacobian. Using this result, the eigenvalue with the largest real part contained in the support of the spectrum of is. Therefore, the system will lose stability when. This result is known as the May stability criterion. It implies that dynamical stability is limited by diversity, and the strictness of this trade-off is related to the magnitude of fluctuations in interactions. Recent work has extended the approaches of May to construct phase diagrams for ecological models, like the generalized Lotka-Volterra model or consumer resource models, with large complex communities with disordered interactions. 11, 12, 9. This work has relied on uses and extensions of random matrix theory, the cavity method, the replica formalism, and other methods inspired by spin glass physics. Types. Although the characteristics of any ecological system are susceptible to changes, during a defined period of time, some remain constant, oscillate, reach a fixed point or present other type of behavior that can be described as stable. 13. This multitude of trends can be labeled by different types of ecological stability. Dynamical stability. Dynamical stability refers to stability across time. Stationary, stable, transient, and cyclic points. A stable point is such that a small perturbation of the system will be diminished and the system will come back to the original point. On the other hand, if a small perturbation is magnified, the stationary point is considered unstable. Local and global stability. In the sense of perturbation amplitude, local stability indicates that a system is stable over small short-lived disturbances, while global stability indicates a system highly resistant to change in species composition and/or food web dynamics. In the sense of spatial extension, local instability indicates stability in a limited region of the ecosystem, while global or regional stability involves the whole ecosystem or a large part of it. 14. Species and community stability. Stability can be studied at the species or at the community level, with links between these levels. 14. Constancy. Observational studies of ecosystems use constancy to describe living systems that can remain unchanged. Resistance and inertia. Persistence. Resistance and inertia deal with a system's inherent response to some perturbation. A perturbation is any externally imposed change in conditions, usually happening in a short time period. Resistance is a measure of how little the variable of interest changes in response to external pressures. Inertia or persistence implies that the living system is able to resist external fluctuations. In the context of changing ecosystems in post-glacial North America, E.C. Pilu remarked at the outset of her overview, "It obviously takes considerable time for mature vegetation to become established on newly exposed ice-scoured rocks or glacial till. It also takes considerable time for whole ecosystems to change, with their numerous interdependent plant species, the habitats these create, and the animals that live in the habitats. Therefore, climatically caused fluctuations in ecological communities are a damped, smoothed-out version of the climatic fluctuations that cause them." 15. Resilience, elasticity and amplitude. Resilience is the tendency of a system to retain its functional and organizational structure and the ability to recover after a perturbation or disturbance. 16. Resilience also expresses the need for persistence, although from a management approach it is expressed to have a broad range of choices and events are to be looked at as uniformly distributed. 17. Elasticity and amplitude are measures of resilience. Elasticity is the speed with which a system returns to its original, previous state. Amplitude measures how far a system can be moved from the previous state and still return. Ecology borrows the idea of neighborhood stability in a domain of attraction from dynamical system theory. Lyapunov stability. Researchers applying mathematical models from system dynamics usually use Lyapunov stability. 18, 19. Numerical stability. Focusing on the biotic components of an ecosystem, a population, or a community possesses numerical stability if the number of individuals is constant or resilient. 20. Sign stability. It is possible to determine if a system is stable just by looking at the signs in the interaction matrix. Stability and diversity. The relationship between diversity and stability has been widely studied. 421. Diversity can enhance the stability of ecosystem functions at various ecological scales. 22. For example, genetic diversity can enhance resistance to environmental perturbations. 23. At the community level, the structure of food webs can affect stability. The effect of diversity on stability in food web models can be either positive or negative, depending on the trophic coherence of the network. Diversity on stability in food web models can be either positive or negative, depending on the trophic coherence of the network. 24. At the level of landscapes, environmental heterogeneity across locations has been shown to increase the stability of ecosystem functions. 25. A stability-diversity trade-off has also been recently observed in microbial communities from human and sponge host environments. 26. In the context of large and heterogeneous ecological networks, stability can be modeled using dynamic Jacobian ensembles. 27. These show that scale and heterogeneity can stabilize specific states of the system in the face of environmental perturbations. History of the concept. The term ecology was coined by Ernst Haeckel in 1866. Ecology as a science was developed further during the late 19th and the early 20th century, and increasing attention was directed toward the connection between diversity and stability. 28. Frederick Clements and Henry Gleason contributed knowledge of community structure. Among other things, these two scientists introduced the opposing ideas that a community can either reach a stable climax or that it is largely coincidental and variable. Charles Elton argued in 1958 that complex, diverse communities tended to be more stable. Robert MacArthur proposed a mathematical description of stability in the number of individuals in a food web in 1955. 29. After much progress made with experimental studies in the 60s, Robert May advanced the field of theoretical ecology and refuted the idea that diversity begets. Ecological extinction. Ecological extinction is the reduction of a species to such low abundance that, although it is still present in the community, it no longer interacts significantly with other species. 1. Ecological extinction stands out because it is the interaction ecology of a species that is important for conservation work. They state that, unless the species interacts significantly with other species in the community, e.g. it is an important predator, competitor, symbiont, mutualist, or prey, its loss may result in little to no adjustment to the abundance and population structure of other species. 1. Ecological extinction. Ecological extinction is the reduction of a species to such low abundance that, although it is still present in the community, it no longer interacts significantly with other species. 1. Ecological extinction stands out because it is the interaction ecology of a species that is important for conservation work. They state that, unless the species interacts significantly with other species in the community, e.g. it is an important predator, competitor, symbiont, mutualist, or prey, its loss may result in little to no adjustment to the abundance and population structure of other species. 1. This view stems from the neutral model of communities that assumes there is little to no interaction within species unless otherwise proven. Estes, Duggins, and Rathburn 1989 recognize two other distinct types of extinction. Global extinction is defined as the ubiquitous disappearance of a species. 1. Local extinction is characterized by the disappearance of a species from part of its natural range. 1. Keystone species. Payne first established the concept of a keystone species by studying the sea star. Robert Payne 1969 first came up with the concept of a keystone species while studying the effects of the predatory sea star Pisister ocraceus on the abundance of the herbivorous gastropod, Tegula funabralis. This study took place in the rocky intertidal habitat off the coast of Washington. Payne removed all Pisister in 8 meters by 10 meters plots weekly while noting the response of Tegula for 2 years. He found that removing the top predator, in this case being Pisister, reduced species number in the treatment plots. Payne defined the concept of a keystone species as a species that has a disproportionate effect on the community structure of an environment in relation to its total biomass. This keystone species effect forms the basis for the concept of ecological extinction. 2. Examples. Sea otters maintain the overall biodiversity of the kelp forest community. The potential role of the sea otter as the keystone predator in nearshore kelp forests was evaluated by Estes et al. In a 1978 study. They compared the rat and near islands in the Aleutian Islands to test if sea otter predation controls epibenthic invertebrate populations, specifically sea urchins. Undine Turn releases the vegetation association from intense grazing. 3. Estes and his colleagues found that different size structures and densities of sea urchins were correlated with the presence of sea otter populations, and because they are the principal prey of this keystone predator, the sea otters were most likely the main determinants of the differences in sea urchin populations. With high sea otter densities, the herbivora of sea urchins in these kelp forests was severely limited, and this made competition between algal species the main determinant in survival. However, when sea otters were absent, herbivora of the sea urchins was greatly intensified to the point of decimation of the kelp forest community. This loss of heterogeneity serves as a loss of habitat for both fish and eagle populations that depend on the richly productive kelp forest environment. Historical overharvesting of sea otter furs has severely restricted their once wide-ranging habitat, and only today are scientists starting to see the implications of these local extinctions. 3. The California spiny lobster, or Panulirus interruptus, is a keystone predator that has a distinct role in maintaining species diversity in its habitat. Robles 1987 demonstrated experimentally that the exclusion of spiny lobsters from the intertidal zone habitats led to the competitive dominance of mussels Mytilus edulis and M. californianus. This result shows another example of how the ecological extinction of a keystone predator can reduce species diversity in an ecosystem. The threshold of ecological extinction has passed due to overfishing, so that local extinctions of the California spiny lobster are common. 4. Commercial oyster fishing had not affected the Chesapeake Bay ecosystem until mechanical dredges were utilized in the 1870s, resulting in overfishing of the oysters. The bay today is plagued by eutrophication due to algal blooms, and the resulting water is highly hypoxic. These algal blooms have competitively excluded any other species from surviving, including the rich diversity in faunal life that once flourished, such as dolphins, manatees, river otters, sea turtles, alligators, sharks, and rays. This highlights the top-down loss of diversity commercial fishing has on marine ecosystems by removing the keystone species of the environment. 5. Invasive species. The potential ecological extinction of guanacos, Llama guanico, and Lesser Rhea's Pterocnemia pennata, as a prey source for native omnivores and predators in the Argentine Patagonia was assessed by a study by Novaro in 2000. These native species are being replaced by introduced species such as the European rabbit, red deer, and domestic cattle. The cumulative damage from the increased herbivora by introduced species has also served to accelerate destruction of the already dwindling Argentine pampas and steppe habitats. This was the first study to take into account a large number of diverse predators, ranging from skunks to pumas, as well as conduct their survey in non-protected areas that represent the majority of southern South America. Novaro and his colleagues found that the entire assemblage of native carnivores relied primarily on introduced species as a prey base. They also suggested that the Lesser Rhea and guanaco had already passed their ecological effective density as a prey species, and thus were ecologically extinct. It is possible that the niches of introduced species as herbivores too closely mirrored those of the natives, and thus competition was the primary cause of ecological extinction. The effective introduction of new competitors, such as the red deer and rabbit, also served to alter the vegetation in the habitat, which could have further pronounced the intensity of competition. Guanacos and rheas have been classified as a low risk for global extinction, but this simplistic view of their demography does not take into account that they have already become functionally extinct in the Argentine Patagonia. Novaro and his colleagues suggest this loss could have strong effects on plant-animal interactions, nutrient dynamics, and disturbance regimes. 6. This is an example of how current conservation policy has failed to protect the intended species because of its lack of a functionally sound definition for extinction. 6. Christian found Argentine ants to disrupt large seed dispersal mutualisms. Seed dispersal mechanisms play a fundamental role in the regeneration and continuation of community structure, and a recent study by Christian, 2001, demonstrated a shift in the composition of the plant community in the South African shrublands following an invasion by the Argentine ant, Leinpithema humile. Ants disperse up to 30% of the flora in the shrublands and are vital to the survival of fynbos plants because they bury the large seeds away from the dangers of predation and fire damage. It is also crucial for seeds to be buried, because nearly all seed germination takes place in the first season after a fire. Argentine ants, a recent invader, do not disperse even small seeds. Christian tested whether the invasion of the Argentine ant differentially affected small and large seeded fauna. He found that post-fire recruitment of large seeded flora was reduced disproportionately for large seeds in sites already invaded by Argentine ants. These initial low large seed density recruitments will eventually lead the domination of small seeded fauna in invaded habitats. The consequences of this change in community structure highlight the struggle for dispersal of large seeded flora that have potential reverberations around the world because ants are major ecological seed dispersers throughout the globe. 7. Modeling ecological extinction. Below a certain density threshold, flying foxes are no longer effective seed dispersers. The McConkie and Drake 2006 study is unique because it was one of the first attempts to model a density-dependent threshold relationship that described ecological extinction. They studied a seed dispersal interaction between flying foxes and trees with large seeds on the tropical Pacific islands. Insular flying foxes, Pteropus tonginus, are considered to be keystone species because they are the only seed dispersers that can carry large seeds long distances. The host pathogen model by Janssen and Connell suggests that survivorship of seeds in the tropics greatly increases the further away from the parent tree it lands, and that trees require this dispersal in order to avoid extinction. In the pathogen-laden environment of the tropics, seed dispersal only becomes more paramount to species survival. As hypothesized, McConkie and Drake found a threshold relationship between the flying fox index, FFI, and the median proportion of seeds carried over 5 meters. Below the threshold of abundance, seed dispersal was insignificant and independent of flying fox abundance. However, above the threshold, dispersal positively correlated with increased flying fox abundance, as measured by the FFI. Although they did not directly prove the cause for this relationship, McConkie and Drake proposed a behavioral mechanism. Flying foxes are known to be territorial, and in the absence of competition a flying fox will eat within one tree, effectively dropping the seeds right below it. Alternatively, if there is a high density of flying foxes feeding at one time, abundance above the threshold density, then aggressive behavior, such as stealing fruit from another individual's territory, will lead to longer average seed dispersal. In this way, the seed dispersing flying fox has a disproportional effect on the overall community structure in comparison to their relative biomass. Modeling the effect of ecological extinction on communities is the first step to applying this framework into conservation work. 8. While ecologists are just starting to get a grapple on the significant interactions within an ecosystem, they must continue to find an effective density threshold that can maintain the level of equilibrium species diversity. Only with this knowledge of where and to what extent a specific species interacts with its environment will the proper and most efficient levels of conservation work take place. This work is especially important on the limited ecosystems of islands, where there are less likely to be replacement species for specific niches. With species diversity and available habitat decreasing rapidly worldwide, identifying the systems that are most crucial to the ecosystem will be the crux of conservation work. 8. Climate change. Climate change has produced numerous shifts in the distributions and abundances of species. Thomas et al. 2004 went on to assess the extinction risk due to these shifts over a broad range of global habitats. Their predictive model using midline estimates for climate warming over the next 50 years suggests that 15 to 37% of species will be committed to extinction by 2050. Although the average global temperature has risen 0.6 degrees Celsius, individual populations and habitats will only respond to their local changes in climate. 9. Root et al. 2002 suggests that local changes in climate may account for density changes in regions, shifts in phenology timing of events, changes in morphology biology, such as body size, and shifts in genetic frequencies. They found that there have been an average phenological shift of 5.1 days earlier in the spring for a broad range of over 1,000 compiled studies. This shift was also, as predicted, more pronounced in the upper latitudes that have concurrently had the largest shift in local average temperatures. 10. While the loss of habitat, loss of pollinator mutualisms, and the effect of introduced species all have distinct pressures on native populations, these effects must be looked underneath a synergistic and not an independent framework. Climate change has the potential to exacerbate all of these processes. Naring 1999 found a total of 16 non-indigenous thermophilic phytoplankton established in habitats northwards of their normal range in the North Sea. He likened these changes in range of more southerly phytoplankton to climatic shifts in ocean temperature. All of these effects have additive effects to the stress on populations within an environment, and with the additionally fragile and more complete definition of ecological extinction must be taken into account into preventative conservation measures. 11. Implications for conservation policy. Conservation policy has historically lagged behind current science all over the world, but at this critical juncture politicians must make the effort to catch up before massive extinctions occur on our planet. For example, the pinnacle of American conservation policy, the Endangered Species Act of 1973, fails to acknowledge any benefit for protecting highly interactive species that may help maintain overall species diversity. Policy must first assess whether the species in question is considered highly interactive by asking the questions: does the absence or loss of this species, either directly or indirectly, incur a loss of overall diversity, affect the reproduction or recruitment of other species, lead to a change in habitat structure, lead to a change in productivity or nutrient dynamics between ecosystems, change important ecological processes, or reduce the resilience of the ecosystem to disturbances? 12. After these multitudes of questions are addressed to define an interactive species, an ecologically effective density threshold must be estimated in order to maintain this interaction ecology. This process holds many of the same variables contained within viable population estimates, and thus should not be difficult to incorporate into policy. To avoid mass extinction on a global scale unlike anyone has seen before, scientists must understand all of the mechanisms driving the process. It is now that the governments of the world must act in order to prevent this catastrophe of the loss of biodiversity from progressing further and wasting all of the time and money spent on previous conservation efforts. 12. Ecological extinction. Their predictive model using midline estimates for climate warming over the next 50 years suggests that 15 to 37% of species will be committed to extinction by 2050. Although the average global temperature has risen 0.6 degrees Celsius, individual populations and habitats will only respond to their local changes in climate. 9. Root et al. 2002 suggests that local changes in climate may account for density changes in regions, shifts in phenology timing of events, changes in morphology biology, such as body size, and shifts in genetic frequencies. They found that there have been an average phenological shift of 5.1 days earlier in the spring for a broad range of over 1,000 compiled studies. This shift was also, as predicted, more pronounced in the upper latitudes that have concurrently had the largest shift in local average temperatures. 10. While the loss of habitat, loss of pollinator mutualisms, and the effect of introduced species all have distinct pressures on native populations, these effects must be looked underneath a synergistic and not an independent framework. Climate change has the potential to exacerbate all of these processes. Naring 1999 found a total of 16 non-indigenous thermophilic phytoplankton established in habitats northwards of their normal range in the North Sea. He likened these changes in range of more southerly phytoplankton to climatic shifts in ocean temperature. All of these effects have additive effects to the stress on populations within an environment, and with the additionally fragile and more complete definition of ecological extinction must be taken into account into preventative conservation measures. 11. Implications for conservation policy. Conservation policy has historically lagged behind current science all over the world, but at this critical juncture politicians must make the effort to catch up before massive extinctions occur on our planet. For example, the pinnacle of American conservation policy, the Endangered Species Act of 1973, fails to acknowledge any benefit for protecting highly interactive species that may help maintain overall species diversity. Policy must first assess whether the species in question is considered highly interactive by asking the questions: does the absence or loss of this species, either directly or indirectly, incur a loss of overall diversity, affect the reproduction or recruitment of other species, lead to a change in habitat structure, lead to a change in productivity or nutrient dynamics between ecosystems, change important ecological processes, or reduce the resilience of the ecosystem to disturbances? 12. After these multitudes of questions are addressed to define an interactive species, an ecologically effective density threshold must be estimated in order to maintain this interaction ecology. This process holds many of the same variables contained within viable population estimates, and thus should not be difficult to incorporate into policy. To avoid mass extinction on a global scale unlike anyone has seen before, scientists must understand all of the mechanisms driving the process. It is now that the governments of the world must act in order to prevent this catastrophe of the loss of biodiversity from progressing further and wasting all of the time and money spent on previous conservation efforts.